Money rules. Welcome to the Money Rules podcast, where we tackle your personal financial matters with leading financial advisors. Your host, Boitumelo Ntsoko.
Retirement planning often seems like a distant concern, and because of this view, many people develop the habit of delaying their retirement planning. Usually, the thought process might be, I have time, I'll get to it later. But what appears to be a minor postponement can have significant repercussions. In this episode, I'm joined by Craig Tor, who is a certified financial planner at Crew Invest. He'll be delving into the hidden costs and the stark realities of procrastinating on funding your retirement. Welcome to the podcast, Craig.
Thank you very much, Jimmy.
We often hear the statistic that only 6% of South Africans can afford to retire comfortably. Can you please break down for us why this is?
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons. Probably the biggest one having to do with our need for instant gratification. You know, the opposite of saving is spending, and it's a hell of a lot easier to spend than it is to save. So, and we tend to think that retirement is such a long way away, we can catch up at a later stage. So that's probably the one reason. Then more on a practical level, I suppose early withdrawals from retirement funds. So when people job hop, they tend to very often cash in what they've accumulated, not quite fully understanding the consequences of doing so. You know, so for example, that money, had it have remained invested, would have doubled its purchasing power after a period of around about 14 years. You know, I'm assuming growth of inflation plus 5, which is what one can expect in a retirement fund. But if you make that withdrawal very early on in your work career, you potentially have given up anything up to 8 times the amount of money that would have been available had it have remained invested until your retirement. So it compounds against you when you do those early withdrawals. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons for people not having sufficient at retirement.
Craig, people are often encouraged to start planning for their retirement early. Can you maybe give us the advantages of doing this?
Yeah, I think, look, there's the obvious advantage of compounding, you know, so as I've just illustrated previously, the longer your money is invested, the more time it's got to compound. So effectively around about an 8-to-1 benefit, over a 40-year work life experience of saving. But probably more importantly, the habit-forming nature of starting to save early. Most of us save best by paying our future selves first. In other words, we save before we spend, and then you don't have to worry about the guilt of trying to save at the end of the month. Essentially, you're saving at the beginning of the month via a debit order running off of your account. But the key issue here is the habit-forming nature of saving early. It just becomes ingrained. You get used to living on the balance of your income, and you know that retirement is essentially taken care of in that regard.
Could you also maybe explain to us the concept of the replacement ratio in retirement planning and what significance it holds?
It's a nice guideline, you know, so typically pension funds would calculate retirement on a replacement ratio of, let's say, 70%. In essence, what that means is that if you save X amount, you would have an investment large enough to be able to draw 70% of your current take-home pay in your retirement years, which generally is an acceptable number, because if one contemplates that your current salary, you might be funding or paying for a bond from that salary, you might be raising kids out of that salary, and that typically includes the contribution towards retirement as well. So 70% is generally regarded as a healthy replacement ratio for retirees.
Craig, earlier in the conversation, we touched on the importance of starting your retirement savings journey early. Could you walk us through a case study that illustrates the difference between beginning contributions early versus delaying them?
Yes, of course. So I'll work on that 70% replacement ratio, and we work on a life expectancy of or a retirement term of 30 years. So from age 65 to age 95. I know that might seem a bit long for most, but we'd rather give ourselves the best chance of not running out of money. So if you were to want to meet that requirement, as a 25-year-old, you'd be required to save about 15% of your salary. Should you just keep pace with inflation as your salary increases, and you just did that for the rest of your life, you should have enough money to draw down 70% of your final salary for a period of 30 years. That would be the case if you started saving as a 25-year-old. If you postpone the start date just by 10 years to age 35, you almost need to double up on that. You'd need to save about 27% of your income in order to achieve the same objectives. And a further delay, in other words, if you delayed that start until age 45, you would find that you'd need to save just over 50% of your income in order to retire at that age. A couple of other ratios that might make sense from that point of view, if you think about it. If you start saving as a 25-year-old, you only need to save about 1 unit to ensure that you get 5 units at the back end. In other words, for every 1 rand saved as a 25-year-old, it enables you to draw 5 rand in real terms in your retirement. Whereas if you postpone that by that start date to age 35, then your ratio is a 1-to-3 ratio, roughly. So that means for every rand you save from age 35, it would only have time to grow to enable you to draw 3 rand in that retirement scenario we sketched. And then if you were to delay that retirement to starting that retirement saving to 45, then your ratio changes to 1 as to 1.5. So for every rand saved, you would only have 1.50 rand because you've got a very short period of time to get compounding on that. And if you leave it till age 70, then you're literally on a 1-to-1 ratio. So in other words, if you start saving for your retirement at age 50, you would need to save a rand for every rand that you needed to draw in retirement, simply because you've left it so late. So I know that's quite a lot, but hopefully that gives some useful guidelines.
It sure does. For our listeners considering their options, what strategies can help them bridge their gap if they've started late or have inadequate savings?
I think the big thing is to have a plan, but one that's achievable. You know, what we find very often, the software that's available, if you use it in a very bland way, it can be demotivating for the person who's left it late. So you need a plan that's achievable, so that it actually motivates the person to make changes and to start the process of saving for retirement and not feel overwhelmed by it. You know, at the end of the day, the toolkit, you know, the financial planner can't there's no silver bullet, there's no magic wand that we can wave. But there are a number of factors that we can suggest that would improve the situation. The obvious one being delayed retirement, saving more leading up to retirement, and that obviously stems from the budgeting process. Toning down your expectations in retirement, in other words, spending less. And then the one that most people expect to be the silver bullet is to get a better investment return, and that you could do by investing a little bit more aggressively. But those are the sort of the areas that one can look at in order to improve the situation for those people leaving the start late.
Thank you for joining us on this episode, Craig.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you for hosting.
That was Craig Tor, who is a certified financial planner at Crew Invest.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Money Rules Podcast. To listen to more, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.